I think the major differences is that you have to do a lot more work um, without a teacher, without help. You have to do a lot of reading by yourself, a lot of research, but also things that aren't in the textbook. So, like actual real articles or news articles or films.
For me, I'd say the main differences are the fact that at university you have to do much more independent work, whereas at school it's a lot more prescribed and they tell you to do these exercises at home and you have to do those exercises and that's it. So that for me was a big difference. And then also the fact that the cultural modules take up they're a lot more important. At A level you do a bit of culture, but it's mainly focused on the language.
I think what's different about studying languages at university to school is it's primarily, obviously if you have culture modules with languages, it proves harder because you're getting into more depth with the text than you would be in school. But at the same time, I would just say that it's more about actually becoming good and more natural with the language, whilst in school it was more about being able to pass an exam in it or get a good grade in the exam.
I'd say the major difference is that at school a lot more of your information is given to you, whereas at university it's much more independent. You have to go out and find things for yourself. So I would, for example, with Italian, it was a new language. If you learn a new language at school, you spend weeks going through numbers, colours, seasons, all the basic vocab, which we don't have time for at university. So a lot of it is studying for yourself and going home and doing it in your spare time, because we don't have many contact hours. So then there's a lot of responsibility on you to go and do it yourself, otherwise you'll be left behind. And also the pace, whereas in school you'd spend like 3 weeks on 1/10. Here we do it in an hour, and then you don't necessarily go back to it for another year. So it's a lot of personal responsibility to keep going over things yourself and learn a lot yourself. You're a lot less spoon-fed.
Because at GCSE, the jump between GCSE and A-level is bigger, I think, than the jump between A-level and university. Because at GCSE you have to, when you're given assessments, it's right, you can basically learn it. So you can write whatever you want, it's corrected by your teacher, and you learn it to go in to speak it. Whereas suddenly at A-level, you're expected to not use dictionaries, you're not allowed this, not allowed that, and you just have to know it. I think a lot of people are quite intimidated by it, because they think it's too big a jump going from complete dependency to suddenly, in the space of a year, needing to know the language inside and out. I think one of the most challenging parts for me personally, at university, from A-level, is the sudden need to really do things by yourself. So there is the jump between GCSE and A-level where you suddenly have to do more things by yourself, but then there's a further jump still between A-level and university, and it's actually making sure you're organised, making sure you know what you're doing, when you need to do it, and make sure you meet all your deadlines. That is it's different, and it's probably one of the most challenging parts of it is that the book doesn't stop with anybody else. Sort of, it's up to you, and it's fully your responsibility. So coming to terms with that was probably one of the most challenging parts of university in the first few weeks, at least.
In terms of the actual studying side of things, I thought the transition was obviously a step, but I didn't think it was completely overwhelming. I thought the most part is more just the self-motivation and the independence that you need, obviously, at university. So with a language, because it's so important to kind of keep speaking, keep listening, you can't just read. I mean, obviously reading is important too, but you can't just you can't get away with not doing anything in your own time. So I think that was definitely a transition for me, because there are a lot more contact hours at school, so you were kind of more exposed to it without having to necessarily do your independent work and your own kind of input into the learning of the language.
To be honest, the main reason why I wanted to study languages was because I loved the language itself. And in A-level, we studied a play in Spanish and a period of history in French, but that was it. We'd only touched on it. At uni, that becomes a big part of studying languages, and you do learn that it is actually integral to know these things in order to really understand a language. And I suppose even though it was difficult for me at first to really engage with, Spanish literature and, Italian fascism, once I got stuck in and really committed to it and just gave it a go, I really enjoyed it.
What I'd probably suggest to language teachers in secondary schools is generally just make it more about the sort of like the culture as well as the language, because I remember when I was doing GCSE, it was all about passing the exam really and being able to write 150 words about going to the beach with your friends. And I mean, obviously you do have to pass the exam, but I felt like that wasn't actually that interesting, and I feel like there were probably quite a few people who were more than competent with the language but just weren't really that inspired to study it because they didn't find it that interesting.
We were very restricted to the curriculum, so we would study a certain book or a certain film, and that was it, whereas we didn't really see what was going on in the country on the whole, or we didn't learn anything about the food or other interesting things, so that would be nice to do.
So when I was doing my GCSEs and A-levels, I found that I was prepared for an exam and not necessarily prepared to be able to speak the language, which is something I love about here at university. I'm prepared, I feel a lot of it's orientated around your third year abroad when you're going to be speaking the language, and particularly in grammar lessons, words are pointed out that could be useful then. And so there's the different registers are important. You don't just look at what's useful for the exam, you look at what's useful for actually using it, for actually being able to communicate in the language, which is something that I'm more interested in. I really enjoy doing, is being able to talk naturally with someone.
I think it's really important when you have a student that really loves languages to give them a lot of time and focus on why the language is the way it is. So at school at GCSE, we were just told that this verb is irregular, and we weren't really told why. And for someone that wants to pursue languages, that could be quite frustrating. And so it would be nice to just go a little bit deeper into the linguistics of the language. And I think that would be quite useful to prepare us for a languages degree as well.
I think with languages, because they're quite sort of formulaic in terms of how to pass like a GCSE exam or an A-level exam, you know, they teach you this much grammar, you do this in an essay, and they kind of teach you really exam-based stuff. I think there are going to be certain people that's all they want, but if you're actually interested in languages, like you're going to do it at uni, then you want more than that. You kind of might want to start learning idioms and things like that, because you generally actually just find it interesting, as opposed to other people that they just want to pass the exam. And I think therefore schools need to kind of differentiate between people that are just there to do it and those people that actually enjoy it. And I think I definitely felt at times like it was way too slow, languages at school.
I think secondary schools should definitely encourage their students to do so much independent work, so listening to podcasts, watching news or even TV shows in the language, and all of that should be outside of the classroom, so it shouldn't be expected that you can kind of get away with studying a language just in the classroom. You should definitely be encouraged to do your own work and put your own
I'd say is
effort
an issue
into it.
is the sterile nature of language learning in secondary schools, and the reason why, in my opinion, so many students become disadvantaged with language learning is because they're all saying the same thing. You know, language learning is different to maths, science, and all the rest, because you're encouraged to be individual and say what you want to say, what you want to say, not what your examiner wants to see or hear. And because the problem at school is everyone is saying that they went to the beach on Saturday and went to the cinema on Friday, and that's not what it should be about. It should be that is this much of what is capable from language learning. There is so much more that can be said that students don't get to see in schools, and that's why they drop them. That's why they drop the languages and aren't studying them.
I think this is particularly an aspect in speaking. I know like different schools kind of, they take different approaches, and it all depends on kind of like finance and things like that, but we never had anyone we could speak Italian with, so we were kind of we never had like separate speaking classes or anything like that, and also in French this kind of reflected, because a lot of the things we have to do in French involves presentations in front of classes, which, and I suppose in Italian as well, which is something we've never really done before. It's always, if ever it was speaking, it was always a one-to-one kind of thing, and I think this obviously like they're trying to focus on you and they're trying to kind of focus on your like individual ones, but yeah, when you come to university and you have to present, it was probably the most daunting thing I've ever done, and I think in that way they can prepare you a bit more.
I think what, like certainly something that could be done to improve the teaching of languages at secondary level, first is improving the way grammar's taught. So before year 12, I couldn't tell you what a subject, an object, a pronoun, a preposition, I couldn't tell you what any of that was. And that is another one of the reasons why I think people are quite put off, because there's suddenly, in terms of grammar, a lot that you're expected to know very quickly, and it's not that sort of level of knowledge and that sort of grammar it's not taught to lower school in secondary school level enough. So I think that's probably one of the things that could be done to improve. And another aspect is you do learn the language, but it's things that aren't particularly practical. So like it's all well and good knowing what's in a pencil case, what I do on holiday, what subjects at school are, but if you put me in the middle of a street in Spain, for example, it's no good to me. I didn't feel able to have a conversation with a Spanish person because of secondary school languages. It was only really at A-level I developed the confidence, the vocab, the competency in grammar to actually feel more confident and use the language. I think that's certainly that the way it's taught at A-level could be brought a little bit further down into lower schools to motivate people a bit more to carry on.
The way that, well, for me, I'm quite out of the school system now, but the way it worked when I was doing my GCSEs, we had controlled assessments. I'm not sure if they still exist, where we were given our questions a couple of weeks or a week in advance, and we had all that time to prepare. So it meant it was a really big shock at A-level and also at uni level when you were given a question and you had to write it, you had no time to prepare. So I'd say maybe for teachers would be a really good idea to, even if that's not the way they're assessed, to give their students the experience of being given a question and then there and having to respond to it, because I guess after all that's what a language is about. If you're on holiday, no one's going to give you 2 weeks to think about your order at a restaurant or something. So I think spontaneity is really important, and being able to answer something straight away without preparing for it for ages. So that would be a really good thing to practice.